I never thought my helmet camera would capture evidence of a hit and run. But there I was on a Tuesday afternoon in Phoenix, Arizona, watching footage of the HOA president smashing into my parked Yamaha MT-09 and driving away like nothing happened. My name is Scott Palmer, and I had just moved into the Sunset Ridge community 3 months ago. The place seemed nice enough when I signed the papers. Clean streets, well-maintained common areas, and a reasonable HOA fee of $200 a month. What I didn't know was that the HOA president, a woman named Patricia Morrison, ran the neighborhood like her own personal fiefdom. She was one of those people who seemed to wake up every morning looking for something to complain about, and unfortunately for me, I became her favorite target the day I rolled my motorcycle into my driveway. The trouble started immediately. Within 24 hours of moving in, I found a violation notice on my door. Apparently, my motorcycle needed to be parked in the garage, not in the driveway. Never mind that half the neighborhood had cars sitting in their driveways. Never mind that my lease specifically allowed for one vehicle in the driveway. Patricia had decided motorcycles were unsightly, and that was that. I ignored the first notice. Then came the second one with a $50 fine attached. I called the HOA office and spoke to Patricia directly. She had that particular tone that middle-aged women who have never been told no seem to perfect over the years. Sharp, condescending, and entirely unwilling to listen to reason. "Mr. Palmer, the rules are quite clear," she said. "Motorcycles must be stored in garages or covered parking areas." "Can you show me where that's written in the CC and RTCS?" I asked, keeping my voice level. There was a pause. "It falls under the General Aesthetics Clause." "Which says what exactly?" Another pause. "All vehicles must maintain community standards." "My motorcycle is clean, well-maintained, and parked legally in my own driveway. I have a car in the garage. Where exactly am I violating anything?" The conversation went downhill from there. Patricia informed me that she would be adding additional fines if I didn't comply, and I informed her that I would be happy to see her in small claims court if she wanted to pursue that route. We hung up with nothing resolved. Over the next 2 months, Patricia made my life as difficult as possible. She cited me for leaving my trash cans visible from the street 15 minutes past the pickup deadline. She measured my grass with a ruler and gave me a violation for it being 3 inches tall instead of 2.5. She even tried to fine me for having my porch light on past 10 p.m., claiming it violated the community quiet hours, which apparently extended to light pollution in her mind. I paid the legitimate fines and fought the ridiculous ones. The HOA board meetings became a regular part of my schedule, and I quickly learned that Patricia had most of the board in her pocket. They rubber-stamped whatever she wanted, too tired or too afraid to stand up to her. A few neighbors quietly told me they sympathized, but nobody wanted to rock the boat. The Tuesday everything changed started like any other day. I had the day off from my job as an HVAC technician, so I decided to take my bike out for a ride through the desert. Phoenix in October is perfect for riding, with temperatures finally dropping below the surface of the sun levels of summer. I geared up, grabbed my helmet with the mounted camera I always used to record my rides, and headed out around 9 in the morning. I spent 4 hours cruising through the desert roads outside the city, hitting some of my favorite spots near South Mountain Park. The camera captured everything: the winding roads, the saguaro cacti standing like sentinels, the brilliant blue sky that stretches forever in Arizona. When I got home around 1 in the afternoon, I was in a great mood. I parked the bike in my driveway, right where I always did. I took off my helmet and set it on the seat, camera still attached and still recording, because I always let the battery run down completely before charging it. It was just habit. The camera would keep recording until it died, usually another hour or two after I finished riding. I headed inside, grabbed a shower, and made myself lunch. I was sitting on my couch eating a sandwich and watching TV when I heard a loud crash from outside. The sound was unmistakable metal hitting metal, followed by the distinct sound of a motorcycle tipping over. I dropped my sandwich and ran to the front door. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. My bike was lying on its side in the driveway, the right mirror shattered, the fairing cracked, and the handlebar bent at an ugly angle. But what really caught my attention was the white Lexus SUV speeding away down the street. Patricia Morrison's white Lexus SUV. I ran to my bike and carefully lifted it back onto its kickstand. The damage was extensive. Beyond the obvious broken parts, there were deep scratches along the entire right side, the exhaust was dented, and when I tried to turn the handlebars, they caught on something bent in the steering assembly. This wasn't a couple $100 of damage. This was going to run into the thousands. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and called the police. The non-emergency line transferred me twice before I got someone who could help. I explained what happened, and they said they would send an officer to take a report. While I waited, I examined the damage more carefully. That's when I remembered the helmet camera. My heart started racing as I grabbed the helmet from where it had fallen near the front wheel. The camera was still running, the little red light blinking steadily. I turned it off and took it inside. I plugged the camera into my laptop with hands that wouldn't stay steady. The files took a minute to transfer, and then I opened the last video. I skipped ahead to where I had parked and gone inside. The camera had a wide-angle view that captured most of my driveway and a good portion of the street. For about 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then, Patricia's white Lexus came into frame. She was driving slowly down the street, and I could see her head turning as she looked at the houses. When she got to mine, she stopped. Just stopped right in the middle of the street, staring at my motorcycle. What happened next was so ridiculous I almost laughed, except I was too angry. Patricia pulled her SUV forward, then backed up, then pulled forward again, maneuvering until she was positioned at an angle that would let her pull into my driveway. Then she accelerated. She hit my motorcycle straight on with the front corner of her SUV. The bike stood no chance. It flew sideways and crashed to the ground with the same sound I had heard from inside. But Patricia wasn't done. She put the SUV in reverse, backed up, looked around quickly to see if anyone was watching, and then drove away. The video captured everything. Her license plate, clear as day. Her face, visible through the windshield, that pinched expression of satisfaction that made my blood boil. The deliberate nature of the act. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional destruction of property, caught in perfect high-definition video. The police officer arrived about 30 minutes after I called. His name was Officer Rodriguez, a young guy who looked fresh out of the academy. He took out his notepad and started asking questions. "So you heard the crash and came outside?" "That's right." "I saw a white Lexus driving away and my bike was on the ground." "Did you see who was driving?" "Patricia Morrison. She's the HOA president, lives 3 streets over." Officer Rodriguez wrote that down. "And you're sure it was her vehicle?" "Positive. But I can do better than that." I pulled out my phone and showed him the helmet camera video. His eyes widened as he watched. When it finished, he watched it again. Then he asked me to send it to him, which I did immediately. "Mr. Palmer, this is pretty clear-cut. This isn't just a hit and run, this is criminal damage. She deliberately struck your motorcycle. Can you arrest her?" I need to speak with her first, but based on this video, yes, I'll be recommending charges. The county attorney will make the final decision, but I don't see how they could pass on this. Officer Rodriguez took detailed photos of the damage, measured some skid marks on my driveway, and collected paint transfer from my bike that matched the white color of Patricia's SUV. He gave me a case number and told me he would be in touch. After he left, I called my insurance company. That was its own nightmare of hold music and transfers, but eventually I got through to a claims adjuster named Mike who sounded sympathetic. So you have video of the incident, crystal clear. I already sent it to the police. Can you send it to me too? That's going to make this claim process a lot smoother. I sent him the video and photos of the damage. He told me they would process the claim and go after Patricia's insurance for the costs. He also arranged for a tow truck to take my bike to a certified Yamaha repair shop. The tow truck came an hour later. Watching them load my bike onto the flatbed made me furious all over again. I had owned that motorcycle for 2 years. I had saved up for months to buy it. I took meticulous care of it, and some petty tyrant with a vendetta had destroyed it because she didn't like where I parked. I spent the rest of the afternoon making calls. I called the repair shop and explained the situation. I called a lawyer friend from high school who didn't practice this kind of law, but gave me some names of attorneys who did. I called my parents back in California and vented for 30 minutes. My mom was horrified. My dad told me to nail Patricia to the wall, which was pretty much my plan. Around 6 that evening, Officer Rodriguez called me back. "Mr. Palmer, I went to Miss Morrison's house to speak with her. And she denied everything, said she was home all afternoon and never left her house. I felt my jaw clench, even after you showed her the video." I didn't show her the video yet. I wanted to get her statement first. When I told her we had evidence, she got very defensive, started talking about how you're a problem resident and how you've been harassing her. "Are you kidding me?" I'm not done. I asked to see her vehicle and she refused. Said I needed a warrant. So I looked at it from the street and Mr. Palmer, there's fresh damage to the front right corner of her SUV. Paint transfer, a cracked headlight housing, the whole 9 yards. So what happens now? I'm writing up the report tonight and forwarding it to the county attorney's office tomorrow morning. Based on the video evidence and the damage to her vehicle, I'm recommending charges for hit and run, criminal damage to property, and making a false statement to police. The county attorney will review it and decide whether to file charges. How long does that take? Usually a few weeks. But with video evidence this clear, I expect they'll move pretty quickly. I thanked Officer Rodriguez and hung up. Then I sat on my couch and watched the video again. And again. Each time I saw Patricia deliberately aim her SUV at my motorcycle, I got angrier. This wasn't just about the bike anymore. This was about someone who thought she was above the rules, who thought she could do whatever she wanted to people she didn't like. The next morning, I woke up to find my doorbell ringing at 7 a.m. I dragged myself out of bed and opened the door to find Patricia standing there with 2 other people I recognized from HOA board meetings. One was Harold Chen, the vice president, and the other was Margaret Swift, the treasurer. "Mr. Palmer, we need to discuss your continuing violations of community standards," Patricia said without preamble. I stared at her. "Are you serious right now? Your motorcycle was creating an eyesore in your driveway, and now it's finally gone. However, there are fluids staining your driveway that need to be cleaned immediately, or you'll face additional fines." The fluids were from when the bike tipped over. Oil and coolant had leaked onto the concrete. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my voice calm. "Patricia, I know it was you who hit my motorcycle yesterday. I have you on video. The police have you on video. You're going to be charged with multiple crimes and you're standing on my doorstep threatening me with fines." Her face went pale, then flushed red. "I don't know what you're talking about. Save it for your lawyer. Get off my property." Harold stepped forward. "Scott, let's everybody calm down here." "I am calm, but I'm not going to stand here and be threatened by someone who just committed multiple crimes against me. You all need to leave." Margaret looked uncomfortable. "Patricia, maybe we should go." But Patricia wasn't done. "You've been a problem since the day you moved in, Mr. Palmer. This neighborhood has standards and you refuse to follow them. The board will be meeting to discuss additional penalties." "The board can discuss whatever you want. Just do it away from my house." I closed the door in their faces and immediately called the lawyer whose name my friend had given me. Her name was Deanna Foster, and she specialized in property disputes and HOA issues. Her receptionist scheduled me for an appointment that afternoon. Diana's office was in downtown Phoenix, in one of those sleek glass buildings that look impressive but are hell in the summer sun. She was in her 40s, dressed in a sharp gray suit with the kind of direct gaze that said she didn't waste time. I showed her the video and explained everything that had happened, from the constant harassment about where I parked to Patricia showing up at my door that morning. Diana watched the video 3 times, making notes. When she finished, she sat back and looked at me. "Scott, this is one of the clearest cases I've ever seen. The video is damning. What Patricia did wasn't just an HOA overstepping its authority. She committed serious crimes." "That's what the police said. Here's what's going to happen. The criminal case will proceed through the county attorney's office. That's out of our hands. But we can file a civil suit against Patricia personally for the damages to your motorcycle, and we can also file a separate suit against the HOA for harassment." "How much are we talking about?" "For the motorcycle, whatever your insurance doesn't cover, plus diminished value, plus your time and suffering. For the HOA harassment, we would need to document everything they've done, every bogus fine, every violation notice. We could potentially get those fines refunded, get an injunction against further harassment, and possibly even get Patricia removed from the board." "I want all of that." Deanna smiled. "Good. I'm going to need you to put together a timeline of every interaction you've had with the HOA since you moved in. Every notice, every fine, every conversation. Dates, times, what was said. Can you do that?" "Absolutely. I'll draft a demand letter to Patricia and the HOA. We'll give them a chance to settle before we file suit. Given the video evidence, they might want to avoid a trial." I left Diana's office feeling better than I had since the incident. At least I was doing something proactive instead of just waiting around. The repair shop called me that evening with an estimate. $8,300. My insurance would cover most of it after my deductible, but there would be a gap because the bike was older and they wouldn't cover certain upgraded parts I had installed. Plus, my premium would probably go up, even though I wasn't at fault. Over the next week, things escalated in ways I hadn't expected. The HOA sent me a formal notice that they were placing a lien on my property for unpaid fines totaling $1,500. According to the notice, I had 30 days to pay or they would begin foreclosure proceedings. I called Diana immediately. She was furious. "They can't do that. Most of these fines are clearly bogus and they haven't followed proper procedure for the others. I'm filing an emergency motion to block the lien." 2 days later, the local news got wind of the story. I don't know who tipped them off, probably someone in the police department or maybe a neighbor who had heard about it. A reporter named Jessica Chang from Channel 12 called me and asked if I would be willing to do an interview. I checked with Deanna first. She said it was my decision, but it might help put public pressure on the HOA and Patricia. I agreed to the interview. Jessica and a cameraman came to my house the next afternoon. She was professional and sympathetic, and she seemed genuinely outraged when I showed her the helmet cam footage. "Can we use this video in our story?" she asked. "Absolutely." We did the interview in my driveway, right where the motorcycle had been parked. I explained what had happened, showed the damage in photos, and talked about the pattern of harassment from the HOA. Jessica also interviewed a few of my neighbors. Most were afraid to go on camera, but one, an older man named Robert who lived 2 doors down, was happy to talk. "Patricia Morrison runs this HOA like a dictatorship," he said on camera. "She's been harassing residents for years. Most people just pay the fines and keep their heads down because they don't want the hassle. It's about time someone stood up to her." The story aired 2 days later on the evening news. They led with the helmet cam footage, which was even more dramatic on TV. The anchor called it a shocking case of HOA abuse and deliberate destruction of property. They showed the damage to my bike, played parts of my interview, and included Robert's comments. They even tried to interview Patricia, but she refused to comment and closed the door in their face, which made her look even worse. The story went viral. By the next morning, it was on Reddit, YouTube, and Facebook. The local subreddit for Phoenix exploded with people sharing their own HOA horror stories. The YouTube video got 200,000 views in the first 24 hours. News outlets from other cities started picking it up. My phone started ringing constantly. Other reporters wanted interviews. People from all over the country wanted to share their HOA nightmares. Someone even set up a GoFundMe to help with my legal costs without my knowledge, and it raised $3,000 before I even knew it existed. The attention put enormous pressure on the HOA and Patricia. The board called an emergency meeting, which I attended along with about 50 other residents who had seen the news coverage. The meeting was held in the community center, a bland beige building that smelled like old carpet and disappointment. Patricia tried to run the meeting like normal, but she was immediately shouted down. Residents stood up one after another to complain about how the HOA was run, about unfair fines, about selective enforcement of rules. One woman named Susan talked about how Patricia had fined her $500 for having the wrong color flowers in her front yard. A man named Marcus described being cited for parking his work van in his driveway overnight, even though the HOA rules allowed it. Harold Chen finally stood up and asked Patricia to step outside. The two of them disappeared into a back room for 15 minutes while the crowd got increasingly restless. When they came back, Harold took the microphone. "The board has decided to place Patricia Morrison on administrative leave pending the outcome of the criminal investigation." The room erupted in applause. Patricia's face was bright red, her lips pressed into a thin line. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the community center. After she left, Harold tried to restore some order. "We want to address the concerns that have been raised tonight. We'll be forming a committee to review all fines issued in the last year and make recommendations about which ones should be rescinded." "What about Scott Palmer's fines?" someone shouted. "Mr. Palmer's situation is currently in litigation, so I can't comment on that specifically. But I can say that the board will be reviewing all aspects of how we've handled his case." After the meeting, several neighbors came up to thank me for standing up to Patricia. Susan, the woman who had been fined for her flowers, hugged me and said she was glad someone finally did something. Robert shook my hand and offered to testify on my behalf if it came to that. The county attorney's office called me the following Monday. The assistant prosecutor handling the case was named Thomas Brennan, and he had a voice that sounded like he had been dealing with bureaucracy for too long. "Mr. Palmer, I've reviewed the evidence in your case and will be filing charges against Patricia Morrison. Hit and run, criminal damage to property over $5,000, and providing false information to law enforcement. What happens now? She'll be formally charged and arraigned. Given the nature of the charges, she'll probably post bail immediately. Then we move toward trial unless she takes a plea deal. Do you think she will? Hard to say. The evidence is overwhelming, but some people refuse to admit they did anything wrong. We'll see." Patricia was arrested the following Wednesday. Channel 12 was there to film her being led out of her house in handcuffs, which struck me as excessive until I remembered how she had destroyed my property and then lied about it. The story made the news again that evening with an update on the case. The arraignment happened 2 days later. Deanna went with me to observe. The courtroom was small and crowded with other cases. When Patricia's case was called, she walked in with her attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit. She looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than she had been at those HOA meetings. The judge read the charges. Patricia's attorney entered a not guilty plea. The prosecutor asked for bail of $10,000, citing the deliberate nature of the crime and the fact that Patricia had lied to police. Patricia's attorney argued that she was a respected member of the community with no criminal record and no flight risk. The judge set bail at $5,000, which Patricia posted immediately. As we left the courthouse, Diana turned to me. "She's going to try to fight this." Her attorney wouldn't have taken the case to trial if she was planning to plead guilty. Even with the video, some people can't accept responsibility. They'll fight even when they know they'll lose. The civil case moved forward in parallel with the criminal case. Deanna filed a lawsuit against Patricia personally for the damages to my motorcycle, and a separate suit against the HOA for harassment and wrongful fines. The HOA's attorney reached out within a week wanting to settle. The settlement offer was surprisingly generous. The HOA agreed to rescind all fines they had issued against me, pay my legal fees, and issue a formal apology. They also agreed to revise their enforcement procedures to prevent selective harassment in the future. In exchange, I would drop the lawsuit against the HOA itself. What about Patricia? I asked Deanna. The suit against her personally continues. This settlement is just with the HOA as an organization. I agreed to the settlement. It felt good to have that part resolved, and the changes to the HOA procedures would help other residents too. My motorcycle was finally repaired 6 weeks after the incident. The shop did excellent work, but the bike never felt quite the same. There was a psychological element to it now, a violation that couldn't be fixed with new parts and fresh paint. Every time I looked at it, I thought about Patricia deliberately ramming it with her SUV. The criminal trial was scheduled for February. Deanna connected me with the prosecutor's office to make sure I was prepared to testify. Thomas Brennan walked me through what to expect, the questions he would ask, what Patricia's attorney might ask, how to stay calm under cross-examination. "The video is our strongest evidence," Thomas said, "but your testimony matters too. You need to be clear, factual, and don't let her attorney rattle you." The trial lasted 3 days. The courtroom was half full with spectators, including several of my neighbors and a few reporters. Patricia sat at the defense table looking stern and unrepentant. The prosecution's case was straightforward. Thomas called Officer Rodriguez first, who testified about responding to the scene, observing the damage, and interviewing Patricia. He described how she denied ever leaving her house, even though her SUV had fresh damage consistent with hitting a motorcycle. Then I took the stand. Thomas walked me through the events of that day. I described taking my ride, parking my bike, going inside, hearing the crash, seeing Patricia's SUV driving away. Then he introduced the helmet cam video as evidence. Watching the video play on the courtroom's TV screen was surreal. The jury leaned forward, their eyes fixed on the footage. You could hear Patricia's SUV engine revving as she deliberately accelerated into my motorcycle. You could see her face through the windshield, clear and identifiable. You could see her check if anyone was watching before she drove away. When the video finished, the courtroom was silent. Patricia's attorney, whose name was Gerald Thompson, tried to do damage control during cross-examination. "Mr. Palmer, isn't it true that you and Miss Morrison had a contentious relationship before this incident? She was constantly harassing me with bogus HOA violations, yes. So you had a reason to want to cause her trouble." "I didn't cause her any trouble. She destroyed my property. I just documented it." "Isn't it possible that someone else was driving Miss Morrison's vehicle that day? You can see her face clearly in the video. That's her." "Could the video have been edited or manipulated?" "No. The police verified it was authentic. Gerald tried a few more angles, but there wasn't much he could do. The evidence was overwhelming." Patricia didn't testify in her own defense, which was probably smart given that she had lied to the police. Her attorney called a character witness, some friend who testified that Patricia was a devoted community leader who would never do such a thing. It was weak and unconvincing. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they came back, the forewoman stood and read the verdict. On the count of hit and run, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of criminal damage to property, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of providing false information to law enforcement, we find the defendant guilty. Patricia's face went white. She clutched the edge of the defense table, her knuckles turning white. Gerald put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. Patricia was released on her existing bail pending sentencing. Those 2 weeks felt both long and short. I kept busy with work, caught up with friends, took my bike out for a few rides to try to rebuild my relationship with it. The local news covered the verdict, and I did one final interview with Jessica Chang about how I felt. "I'm glad the jury saw the truth," I told her. "This was never about revenge. It was about accountability. Patricia thought she could do whatever she wanted and get away with it. The justice system proved her wrong." Sentencing day arrived on a cold February morning. The courtroom was even more crowded than before, with several of my neighbors showing up to watch. Patricia looked older somehow, the stress of the trial having worn her down. The judge reviewed the case before announcing the sentence. "Miss Morrison, you held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that position. You deliberately destroyed another person's property, and then you lied to law enforcement about it. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was premeditated criminal behavior." Patricia stared straight ahead, her face expressionless. "On the count of hit and run, I sentence you to 6 months in county jail, suspended with 2 years of supervised probation. On the count of criminal damage to property, I sentence you to pay restitution to Mr. Palmer in the amount of $8,300, plus court costs. On the count of providing false information to law enforcement, I sentence you to 100 hours of community service. Additionally, you are hereby barred from serving in any HOA leadership position during your probationary period." Patricia's attorney had negotiated the suspended jail sentence, which meant she wouldn't actually go to jail unless she violated probation. Part of me wished she had gotten jail time, but the restitution and the ban from HOA service felt like justice enough. After the sentencing, I met with Diana outside the courthouse. "That's it. We're done," she said. "Patricia will pay the restitution through the court system. If she doesn't, they can revoke her probation and send her to jail. Thank you for everything. Thank you for having that helmet camera running. This might be the easiest case I've ever won." The restitution payment came through a month later. $8,300 deposited directly into my account by the court. It covered the gap my insurance hadn't paid and then some. I used the extra money to upgrade the helmet camera on my bike to an even better model. The HOA held new elections in March. Harold Chen stayed on as president, having proven himself to be reasonable during the crisis. They elected 2 new board members who ran on a platform of fair enforcement and transparency. One of them was Robert, my neighbor who had stood up for me at that first contentious meeting. At Robert's first board meeting as a member, they passed a resolution formally allowing motorcycles to be parked in driveways, as long as they were maintained in good condition. They also revised the fine schedule to make it more reasonable and created an appeals process for residents who felt they had been cited unfairly. Patricia became something of a pariah in the neighborhood. I would occasionally see her driving through, always staring straight ahead, never making eye contact with anyone. Her house went up for sale 6 months after the trial. According to neighborhood gossip, she moved to Nevada to live with her daughter. I stayed in Sunset Ridge. The neighborhood actually became a pleasant place to live once Patricia was gone. The new board was reasonable and fair. My neighbors were friendly. I even organized a motorcycle group ride with a few other riders in the community, and we met up once a month to explore the desert roads together. The helmet cam video ended up being used in a local news segment about the importance of documenting evidence when dealing with property disputes. It got shared in online forums about HOA problems and bad neighbors. Someone even made it into a meme that circulated on social media for a while. A year after the incident, I was sitting on my porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple when Robert walked over with a beer in his hand. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Always." He sat down in the other chair and handed me the beer. "I wanted to thank you again for standing up to Patricia. You changed this whole neighborhood." I just didn't want to roll over. Most people do. They take the path of least resistance, pay the fines, follow the rules even when the rules are stupid. You fought back and it made a difference. We sat there drinking our beers and watching the sky darken. My motorcycle was parked in the driveway, right where it belonged, gleaming in the fading light. The helmet was sitting on the seat, camera attached and ready for the next ride. I thought about how close I came to just putting the bike in the garage to avoid the hassle. How easy it would have been to pay Patricia's bogus fines and keep my head down. But standing up for myself had been worth it, not just for me but for everyone else Patricia had been bullying. The helmet camera that had caught everything was a cheap model I had bought on sale 2 years ago. I had never expected it to capture anything more interesting than scenic desert roads and the occasional jackrabbit darting across the pavement. But it had given me something more valuable than any ride footage. Proof. Undeniable, crystal clear proof that I was right and Patricia was wrong. In the weeks following the trial, I received dozens of messages from people around the country who were dealing with their own HOA nightmares. They wanted advice, wanted to know what kind of camera I used, wanted to hear that it was possible to fight back and win. I tried to respond to as many as I could, always with the same message. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. Some of those people ended up winning their own battles against unreasonable HOAs. A woman in Florida used dashcam footage to prove her HOA president had been stealing dues. A man in Texas recorded HOA board meetings and exposed corruption and kickback schemes. A couple in Oregon documented code violations by the HOA management company itself and got them fired. My story became a small part of a larger conversation about HOA reform. Some states started passing laws to increase transparency and accountability in homeowner associations. Others created easier paths for residents to challenge unfair fines and rules. It wasn't a revolution, but it was progress. As for me, I kept riding my motorcycle and parking it in my driveway. Every time I came home from a ride, I would park in that same spot where Patricia had hit it, and I would feel a small sense of satisfaction. This was my home, my property, and nobody was going to tell me I couldn't park my own vehicle in my own driveway. The bike never fully recovered its resale value. Even with the expert repairs, the Carfax equivalent for motorcycles showed the damage history. But I didn't care. I wasn't planning to sell it. That motorcycle had been through something with me, had been a victim of the same petty tyranny I had endured. We were in it together now. I upgraded the security around my house too. I installed a Ring doorbell camera, 2 security cameras covering the driveway and street, and motion sensor lights. If anyone ever tried to mess with my property again, I would have multiple angles of high-definition footage. The technology was getting cheaper and better every year, making it harder for people like Patricia to get away with their bad behavior. The HOA actually started recommending that residents install security cameras after my case. Robert pushed for it at a board meeting, arguing that it would deter crime and help resolve disputes. The board agreed and even negotiated a group discount with a local security company. My relationship with the HOA stabilized into something almost boring, which was exactly what I wanted. I paid my dues on time, kept my property maintained, and attended the occasional board meeting to stay informed. The new board operated transparently, published minutes from their meetings, and actually listened to resident concerns. Diana Foster and I stayed in touch. She sent me a bottle of good whiskey for my birthday with a note that said, "To the easiest case I ever won." I sent her referrals whenever I heard about someone dealing with HOA problems. She told me that my case had brought in several new clients and helped grow her practice. Officer Rodriguez stopped by my house a few months after the trial, just to check in. He was pleased with how everything had turned out and said the case had been one of the more satisfying ones he had worked. We talked for a while about motorcycles since he was thinking about getting one himself. I gave him some recommendations and told him about my monthly riding group. The repair shop that fixed my bike also benefited from the publicity. Several news stories had mentioned them by name, praising their quality work. The owner called to thank me for the free advertising and offered me a discount on future service, which I appreciated. Jessica Chang won a regional journalism award for her coverage of the story. The award citation mentioned how her reporting had sparked a larger conversation about HOA accountability and helped bring about positive change in local communities. She interviewed me for a follow-up piece about the award, and we laughed about how a simple helmet camera had led to all of this. I thought a lot about the randomness of it all. If I hadn't bought that helmet camera, I would have had no proof. It would have been my word against Patricia's, and with her position of authority in the HOA, I probably would have lost. The camera had cost me $79 on Amazon. $79 had been the difference between justice and injustice. That realization made me slightly paranoid in a productive way. I started backing up important documents, keeping detailed records of significant interactions, and being more mindful about evidence and documentation. It wasn't that I expected more trouble, but I had learned the value of being prepared. The neighborhood kids started calling me the motorcycle guy, which amused me. Some of them would stop and ask questions about the bike when I was outside working on it. I always took the time to talk to them, to teach them about motorcycle safety, about respecting other people's property. A few of them said they wanted to get motorcycles when they grew up. One kid, a 12-year-old named Tyler who lived across the street, became particularly interested. His parents were going through a divorce, and I think he latched onto me as a positive male figure. I let him help me wash the bike sometimes, taught him basic maintenance tasks, showed him how to check the tire pressure and oil level. His mom thanked me for giving him something positive to focus on during a difficult time. The sense of community in Sunset Ridge improved dramatically after Patricia left. People were more relaxed, more willing to talk to their neighbors, less worried about being cited for minor violations. Block parties became a regular thing. Someone organized a community garden. The neighborhood actually felt like a neighborhood instead of a prison camp. I ran into Margaret Swift, the former HOA treasurer, at the grocery store about 8 months after the trial. She looked embarrassed when she saw me, like she wanted to avoid the interaction, but I walked up to her. "Margaret, how are you? Scott, I owe you an apology. I should have stood up to Patricia." I knew what she was doing was wrong, but I went along with it because I didn't want to deal with the conflict. I appreciate that. It takes courage to admit when you've made a mistake. For what it's worth, I resigned from the board after everything happened. I didn't feel right staying on after enabling her behavior for so long. We talked for a few more minutes, and I could tell she genuinely felt bad about what had happened. I told her I didn't hold any grudges and that I respected her willingness to acknowledge her mistakes. Sometimes people get caught up in group dynamics and go along with things they know are wrong. It doesn't make it right, but it makes them human. The civil case against Patricia had been resolved as part of the criminal sentencing, but I learned later that she had also been sued by 2 other residents for similar HOA harassment. Both cases settled out of court for undisclosed amounts. Patricia's homeowner's insurance apparently covered some of it, but she still took a significant financial hit. Her house sold for less than the asking price after sitting on the market for 3 months. According to Robert, who followed these things, she lost money on the sale when you factored in the legal fees and settlements. Karma had a way of catching up with people. I sometimes wondered if Patricia had learned anything from the experience. Had she reflected on her behavior and realized she had been wrong? Or did she still see herself as the victim, unfairly persecuted for trying to maintain community standards? I would never know, and ultimately it didn't matter. She was gone, and the neighborhood was better for it. The helmet camera footage continued to live on the internet, racking up millions of views across various platforms. People would occasionally recognize me from it when I was out at bars or restaurants, which was weird but not entirely unpleasant. Most people just wanted to say they supported what I did or share their own HOA horror stories. One guy bought me a beer at a sports bar and told me his HOA had tried to fine him for painting his house the wrong shade of beige. They required cream beige, and he had used tan beige, and apparently there was a difference worth $300 in fines. After seeing my story, he fought the fine and won. These interactions reminded me that bureaucratic tyranny, petty as it might seem, affected real people's lives. A few $100s in bogus fines might not sound like much to some people, but for others, it was a significant financial burden. The stress and anxiety of dealing with unreasonable authority figures took a toll. Standing up to it mattered. I kept riding my motorcycle, exploring new roads, finding new places. Arizona had endless riding opportunities, from the desert highways to the mountain passes up north. Every ride was a reminder of freedom, of the importance of not letting anyone else dictate how you lived your life. The helmet camera was always recording, though I never caught anything as dramatic as Patricia's hit and run again. Mostly it was just beautiful scenery, the occasional wildlife encounter, and one memorable incident where I helped a stranded motorist change a tire. That incident actually ended up being useful. The motorist was an elderly woman whose car had broken down on a remote desert road. I stopped to help, and the whole interaction was caught on my helmet cam. She was so grateful that she insisted on sending me a thank you card and a $100 gift card to a steakhouse, which seemed excessive, but was sweet. The footage also proved useful when she later got scammed by a mechanic who claimed her tire couldn't have been repaired, and she needed 4 new tires. She showed him my video of me successfully fixing the flat with a simple patch, and the mechanic backed down. Another small victory for documentation and transparency. As the 1-year anniversary of the incident approached, Channel 12 wanted to do a follow-up story. Jessica Chang called me to ask if I would be interested. We're doing a segment on how the case has impacted HOA practices in the Phoenix area. We've talked to several legal experts and homeowners who were inspired by your case to challenge their own HOAs. Would you be willing to do an interview? Sure, I'm happy to help. The interview took place in my driveway again, almost exactly a year after the first one. Jessica asked about how the past year had been, what changes I had seen in the neighborhood, whether I thought the outcome was fair. The outcome was more than fair, I told her. Patricia was held accountable for her actions, and the HOA implemented reforms that have made this a better place to live. But the bigger picture is that people saw this story and realized they don't have to accept unfair treatment. They have rights, and they can fight back if those rights are violated. The follow-up story aired during the evening news and focused on the broader impact of the case. They interviewed Deanna Foster, who talked about the increase in HOA-related cases she had taken on. They spoke with a state legislator who was drafting new HOA reform legislation, inspired partly by my case. They showed clips from the original helmet cam footage, which still had the power to shock people who hadn't seen it before. The story concluded with Jessica standing in front of the community center in Sunset Ridge. One man, one motorcycle, and one helmet camera sparked a conversation about accountability and fairness in homeowner associations across Arizona. Sometimes standing up for yourself can change more than just your own situation. It can change a community. Watching the story, I felt a sense of closure. The incident had been traumatic and infuriating, but something good had come from it. Patricia had been held accountable, the HOA had reformed, and people all over the state were questioning whether their HOAs had too much unchecked power. That weekend, my riding group met up for our monthly ride. There were 8 of us now, up from the original 3. We rode out to Roosevelt Lake, took the twisting roads through the mountains, stopped for lunch at a diner in Payson. The Arizona high country was beautiful in spring, with wildflowers blooming and the air crisp and clean. During lunch, one of the newer members, a guy named Marcus who had just joined the group, asked about the helmet cam incident. I had told the story so many times by now that I could recite it from memory, but I walked him through it again. You ever regret pushing it as far as you did? Marcus asked. Some people would have just taken the insurance money and moved on. I thought about that. I don't regret it at all. What Patricia did was wrong and she needed to face consequences. But beyond that, if I had just let it go, she would have kept harassing me and everyone else in the neighborhood. Sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when it's hard and stressful and expensive. Amen to that, said another rider, a woman named Jennifer who worked as a nurse. I had an HOA fine me $2,000 for having a vegetable garden in my backyard. They said it violated the landscaping rules, even though it was in my fenced backyard where nobody could see it. Your story gave me the courage to fight it, and I won. Stories like Jennifer's made everything worthwhile. The stress of the trial, the media attention, the time and energy spent fighting it had all led to positive change for real people. We finished lunch and rode back to Phoenix as the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. My helmet camera captured the whole ride, hours of footage that I would probably never watch but kept anyway. You never knew when you might need evidence of where you were or what you saw. Back home that evening, I sat on my porch and watched the neighborhood wind down for the night. Kids playing basketball in driveways, couples walking their dogs, someone grilling burgers in their backyard. It was peaceful, normal, exactly what a neighborhood should be. My motorcycle sat in the driveway, right where it belonged. The scars from Patricia's attack had been expertly repaired, but I knew they were there. They were a reminder of what I had been through and why it mattered to stand up for yourself. I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondered how she was doing in Nevada. Had she found a new neighborhood to terrorize, or had she learned her lesson? Had losing her position, her reputation, and her home been enough to make her reflect on her behavior? I hoped so, but I wasn't optimistic. People like Patricia rarely changed. What mattered more was that the systems had worked, eventually. The police had taken my complaint seriously. The prosecutor had filed appropriate charges. The jury had seen the evidence and delivered a just verdict. The judge had imposed reasonable consequences. My civil attorney had gotten me proper compensation. The HOA board had implemented reforms. None of it would have been possible without the helmet camera footage. That was the crucial element that turned my word against hers into an open and shut case. Without it, I probably would have lost, and Patricia would have gotten away with it. That realization made me evangelical about documenting important things. I started telling everyone I knew to keep records, save emails, take photos, and record conversations when legally possible. You never knew when you might need proof of what happened. The story became a cautionary tale in local legal circles. Diana told me she used it as an example when teaching continuing education courses for attorneys. The message was simple: document everything, because you never know what might end up mattering in court. My insurance company also used the case in training materials about claims processing. The video evidence had made their job easy, allowing them to quickly approve my claim and go after Patricia's insurance for reimbursement. Their subrogation department had recovered their entire payout plus legal fees. As spring turned to summer and the Phoenix heat became oppressive, I found myself riding more at night when temperatures dropped to merely uncomfortable levels. The city lights sparkled against the dark desert sky, and the roads were less crowded. My helmet camera's night vision mode wasn't as good as the daytime footage, but it still captured enough detail to be useful. The HOA continued to function smoothly under its new leadership. Robert proved to be an excellent board member, always looking out for residents' interests and pushing for reasonable, fair enforcement of rules. Harold stayed on as president and did a competent if unexciting job of managing the community. They faced their first real test when a new resident tried to paint their house bright purple. The HOA rules clearly stated that houses had to be earth tones, and purple definitely wasn't an earth tone. But instead of immediately issuing fines like Patricia would have done, the board talked to the homeowner, explained the rules, and worked out a compromise where they could use a muted lavender that technically qualified as a warm gray with purple undertones. The situation was handled with respect and communication, and both sides walked away satisfied. That's how HOAs were supposed to work, as a tool to maintain property values and community standards, not as a weapon to bully residents. I celebrated my second anniversary in Sunset Ridge with a barbecue, inviting neighbors and friends from my riding group. About 30 people showed up, filling my backyard with conversation and laughter. Robert gave a toast, thanking me again for standing up to Patricia and making the neighborhood a better place. To Scott, he said, raising his beer, the man who proved that sometimes fighting back is worth it. Everyone raised their drinks and echoed the sentiment. I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the Arizona heat. These were good people, and this was a good place to live. Standing up to Patricia had been stressful and difficult, but it had led to this: a community that functioned properly, neighbors who looked out for each other, and a sense that fairness and justice were possible. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up, I looked at my motorcycle parked in the driveway. The helmet was sitting on the seat, camera still attached, always ready to record the next ride. That simple device had changed everything for me. I walked over and picked up the helmet, turning it over in my hands. It was scuffed and worn from 2 years of use, the padding compressed from hours of wearing it, the visor scratched from bug impacts and road debris. But the camera still worked perfectly, still faithfully recorded everything in high definition. "Thanks for being there when I needed you," I said to the camera, feeling slightly ridiculous talking to an inanimate object, but I meant it. That camera had been my witness, my proof, my salvation when everything could have gone wrong. I carried the helmet inside and plugged it in to charge, like I did after every ride. The battery had maybe a year left before it would need to be replaced, and the camera technology would probably be obsolete in another year or two. But for now, it still worked, still served its purpose, still gave me peace of mind knowing that if anything ever happened again, I would have evidence. As I got ready for bed that night, I thought about how much my life had changed in 2 years. I had moved to a new state, bought a house, dealt with the worst kind of neighbor conflict, fought a legal battle, and come out the other side stronger and more confident. I had learned important lessons about standing up for yourself, about the value of evidence and documentation, about how systems could work when you pushed them to. Most importantly, I had learned that you don't have to accept mistreatment just because someone has authority over you. Patricia had been the HOA president, had held power over hundreds of residents, had gotten used to people backing down and accepting her arbitrary rules. But power without accountability was just tyranny, and tyranny needed to be challenged. My helmet camera had given me the tools to challenge it successfully. Without that footage, I would have been just another voice complaining about an unreasonable HOA, easily dismissed and forgotten. With it, I had been able to prove beyond any doubt what had happened, to hold Patricia accountable, and to force positive changes that benefited everyone. As I drifted off to sleep, I could hear the distant sound of a motorcycle somewhere in the neighborhood. Another rider, out enjoying the cool night air, maybe with their own helmet camera recording their journey. I smiled and let sleep take me, content with how things had turned out. The next morning started like any other. I made coffee, checked my email, and got ready for work. But as I was leaving, I noticed something on my doorstep. It was an envelope with no return address, just my name written in neat handwriting. Inside was a single-page letter. It was from Patricia. The letter was brief and formal. She acknowledged what she had done, admitted that she had let her authority as HOA president go to her head, and apologized for the harassment and for destroying my motorcycle. She said she had been in therapy working on anger management and control issues. She wrote that she didn't expect forgiveness, but wanted me to know that she understood what she had done was wrong. I read the letter twice, trying to gauge its sincerity. It could have been written at her therapist's insistence, or as part of some recovery program, or because her lawyer thought it might help if any civil matters came up in the future. But it could also have been genuine. I decided it didn't matter whether it was genuine or not. The apology didn't change what had happened or what she had put me through. But it was something, a small acknowledgement of wrongdoing from someone who had seemed incapable of admitting fault. I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer with all the other documents from the case. Maybe someday I would throw it away. Maybe I would keep it forever as evidence that even people who seem irredeemable can sometimes recognize their mistakes. For now, it was just another piece of paper in a file folder, notable but not life-changing. Life continued its normal rhythm after that. Work, rides, hanging out with friends, HOA meetings that were actually boring in a good way. The helmet camera kept recording rides, capturing beautiful scenery and uneventful commutes. Nothing dramatic happened, which was exactly how I liked it. Sometimes people would recognize me at gas stations or restaurants, would mention seeing the news story or the video online. I always took a few minutes to chat with them, to hear their own HOA stories, or just to accept their thanks for standing up to Patricia. These interactions happened less frequently as time passed, and other news stories took over the public's attention, but they never stopped completely. The video remained online, a permanent record of what had happened. Future residents of Sunset Ridge would probably see it when they searched for information about the neighborhood. Lawyers would continue using it as an example in HOA cases. People dealing with their own bad HOAs would find it and draw inspiration from it. That was Patricia's legacy. Not the years she spent running the HOA, but the moment she lost control and destroyed someone's property, all captured in high definition by a $79 camera. She would be forever remembered not for whatever good she might have done in the community, but for her worst moment, played on loop for millions of people to see. There was a lesson in that too. Your actions matter, especially when you're in a position of authority. One moment of losing control had cost Patricia everything: her reputation, her position, her home, and her freedom for a time. It had taken years to build her status in the community and seconds to destroy it, all because she couldn't control her anger at a resident who refused to comply with her arbitrary demands. As for me, I had learned the value of preparation, of documentation, of standing up for yourself even when it would be easier to give in. Those lessons would stay with me for life, shaping how I approached conflicts and challenges. My motorcycle and I had both been victims of Patricia's rage, and we had both survived it. The bike was repaired and running well. I was stronger and more confident. We hit the road together regularly, the helmet camera always rolling, always watching, always ready to bear witness to whatever might happen next. And that, ultimately, was the point of the whole story. Bad things could happen to anyone at any time. People in positions of authority could abuse that authority. But if you were prepared, if you stood up for yourself, if you had evidence and the courage to fight back, justice was possible. Patricia Morrison hit my parked motorcycle and fled, not knowing my helmet camera was still recording. That camera captured everything, led to her conviction, and sparked changes that made my neighborhood and many others better places to live. All because I had the foresight to buy a cheap camera and the backbone to use the footage when it mattered most. In the end, that made all the difference.